Hello, everyone. I wanted to do a video in which I talk a little bit about the themes of the course, what we will actually be reading, why we're reading what we are reading, and what the general subject matter or area is of this course. If we look at the title of the course, Intellectual Heritage to the Common Good, that should signal that the area that we're in is social thought, political thought, thinking about the basis of human communities, the purpose of human, especially political communities, how they should be structured, how theories of human nature fit in with theories of human government and things like that. I mean, we're in this sort of area of political philosophy. And were this to be, if we look at our readings here, and if you go to modules and then you look at course outline, you'll see everything that we read kind of grouped together into sections. If this were a political philosophy course, an intro to political philosophy, this would be quite a fine syllabus. I mean, in terms of doing that, different thinkers. It is grouped into 4 parts. Part 1, ancient, medieval, modern. Part 2, the birth of liberalism. Part 3, the Enlightenment. And Part 4, the struggle for recognition. These are all just characterizations that I've given these texts as a way to give some shape to our course. Of course, you should know that after every part, after Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, Part 4, there will be a reading exam and a 500-word response essay that will be due, in addition to the discussion boards and study questions for individual readings. So it is a kind of a survey, but a survey that's really based upon the reading of classics. I would consider every one of these works, from Aristotle to Du Bois, to be a classic in its own way in the field of social thought. And by classic, I mean something that is brilliant, not necessarily correct, right? Because we're not going to be, there's no possible way we could agree with everything in these texts because they contradict each other. But brilliant in the sense that somebody has introduced an idea which is challenging, which provides insight, and we have to deal with. Again, we don't have to agree with it, but we have to deal with. Classic in that sense, and classic in the sense that having been incredibly influential, and in a certain respect, if we want to understand our own societies, if we want to understand our past, our present, and have some notion of the future, we need to know these texts. I would say that if you're interested in the basis of government, let's just say there's just no way you can avoid Hobbes's Leviathan. If you're interested in how we conceive of the purpose and origin of government in the modern world, then you have to read or become familiar with Hobbes's Leviathan. Well, if you skip ahead to Du Bois, if you're going to understand American history as a black person, as a white person, as an Asian, doesn't matter. If you're going to understand American history, you have to have some grasp of the African American experience. And I would say that in terms of an African American thinker who's trying to understand the place of black people in American history, in American society, written around 1903, Du Bois is absolutely, you have to read Du Bois. There's just no question about it. There's plenty of other things you have to read too. I'm not saying that this list of classics of social thought is somehow exhaustive. It doesn't cover everything. It covers some things, right? I would say that if you're going to understand the history of feminism, reading Wollstonecraft's Vindication of the Rights of Women is pretty much, you've got to read that. If you're going to understand the basis, especially of American government and the 18th century sort of founding fathers' conception of the nature of government, you have to be familiar with Locke's Second Treatise of Government. So what I've done is, and that greatest hits list should give you a sense of it, is I've chosen texts, within the IH curriculum. This is not just me. This is what IH2 I think is supposed to be about. That I think that will give you a perspective on social thought, on political thought, that will be quite valuable. I mean, you'll be able to, I hope, think about political questions, the larger questions of democracy and freedom and rights and everything, with a certain degree of sophistication that you would be lacking if you were not familiar with these texts. That's really the reason I think we read these texts. And again, I think that each one of them is brilliant. I don't think that I could possibly agree with everything. I mean, as we'll see, especially the older texts, especially Aristotle, who, quite frankly, defends the institution of slavery. I would say in a fairly weak way, but it's an important milestone, I think, in Western social thought. You have this prominent philosopher who's saying that in this sort of strained way, no doubt, but arguing that human slavery, circa 400 years ago in Greece, is actually a good institution. And we're familiar with those sort of arguments in American history too. And I have no doubt in my mind that they're wrong, but I think it's important to read them and confront them. And there's other things in Aristotle which I would say personally, despite his defense of slavery, are quite valuable and provide insight. But that's for you to decide, not me. That's for you to decide. And that's really an important part of the course, is that I'm not trying to tell you how to read these texts. I'm certainly not telling you whether these authors are right or wrong. So the course is structured in 4 parts. Part 1, ancient, medieval, modern. Well, the ancient is Aristotle, the medieval is Dante, and the modern, the early modern, circa 1500 AD is Machiavelli's Prince, and this sort of sweep, very brief sort of sweep from ancient social thought through medieval social thought to early modern, and Machiavelli is really a kind of a turning point, no doubt, at least in Western social thought, towards a new type of thinking about politics, government, community. I wanted to start with something to give you some sort of background, because really this course will concentrate on what I would call modern social thought. And I know modern, Hobbes and Locke are at 17th century, right, 1600s. So that doesn't seem very modern, but they are sort of the early figures who are setting out new ideas, which are particularly ideas that relate to the modern world, as opposed to the ancient world or the medieval world. And we're talking about the West here. I mean, there's a whole other gamut of civilizations that, would be very difficult to include to do justice to them in terms of their thought. But maybe there's a narrowness to every course. But I want to give you a background, because the birth of liberalism is really the departure from traditional modes of thought, traditional ideas in classical and medieval civilization. And that really is, I think, summed up in that one word, liberalism. And it's kind of an elusive word. But liberalism is the idea that there are individuals, first and foremost, that are free. That's where the liberal comes in. Individuals are born free, in perfect freedom. And the problem is that governments necessitate a stricture on that freedom, limitation on that freedom. So as we'll see, the big problem for especially the early liberal thinkers is what balance, how can you balance? Can you have both? Can you have freedom and order? Can you have freedom and law together? And each one, Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, offers a kind of an answer to that. But each one begins with the idea of an individual who in one way or another has freedom. And many of the things we take for granted in terms of political discussion, rights, freedom, liberties, law, limitations on law, really, these ideas are really, at least in a particularly modern way, introduced by these thinkers. So part 3, the Enlightenment. Well, the Enlightenment was a period in the 18th century, maybe into the 19th century. But it was also a kind of a way of thought, the idea of a free society, the idea of a just society, the idea of individuals who were rational and treated each other fairly and were devoted to truth and justice. All sorts of ideas around what we call the Enlightenment. It's not just a period in European and perhaps American history. It's an idea. We will look at documents of early American government, Declaration of Independence, Constitution of the United States, a little bit of the Federalist Papers, but also the German philosopher Kant's great essay, What is Enlightenment, where he, really kind of tries to capture this spirit of progress and progress towards a juster, more rational society, which is so much a part of the idea of enlightenment. And then Mary Wollstonecraft, her Vindication of the Rights of Women, which really in a certain sense which straddles part 3 of the course and part 4 of the course, because if we look at the authors or the subjects or the texts of part 4, Communist Manifesto, John Addington Symonds' A Problem in Modern Ethics, and W.E. Du Bois's The Souls of Black Folks. It is pronounced Du Bois, by the way. I know it's French, but he was American, right? So he pronounced it Du Bois in the end of the 19th century. What you have, and I would include Wollstonecraft's Vindication of the Rights of Women, is a demand on the part of women, of working people, in terms of the Communist Manifesto, of gay people, which is what Symonds' A Problem in Modern Ethics is a groundbreaking work basically defending, in his case, really gay men, because he didn't really understand gay women. It was really his own experience. Really a very early work, a manifesto of what we would call gay rights. And then, of course, Du Bois's The Souls of Black Folk, Du Bois being an incredibly important thinker as an historian, a sociologist, a philosopher, trying to understand and really make a case for the demand for recognition of the rights of African Americans, of Black people in America. So really the last 4 texts of the course really are that, well, we've looked through the classical tradition in Western social thought, but then there are these thinkers, feminists, really communists, but really people who purport to represent the underclass, the proletariat, the workers who have no property, and other people, gay men in this case, but I think it could be definitely thought of as a liberatory work, a manifesto of the rights of all gay people and Black people in America, people who've been marginalized, people who have not been recognized by the Enlightenment or liberalism or any social thought, saying, we have rights too. We need to be recognized, and perhaps the whole idea of society, of government, democracy needs to be changed in certain ways to make it better so that people aren't excluded, so that women aren't tyrannized over men, that working people aren't exploited, gay men are not persecuted, Black people are not excluded from the American democracy or American economy or American education. So really the last part of the course, that idea of the struggle for recognition, I would say is a very important part of the course. But I think it has much more power if you actually look through, to a certain degree, the history of Western social thought and what is actually being said there. So yeah, those are the themes of the course. It is a course in the classics. So reading the text, not just reading some secondhand Wikipedia summary, Cliff Notes nonsense, but actually reading the text is actually very, very important. You have to have respect for these texts. And that's what I would say, a lot of that classic business is really having respect, not necessarily agreement, but respect. I have the highest respect for these texts. Are they wrong sometimes? In my opinion, absolutely. But each one of them I treat with reverence and respect. And that means, if you're reading the Cliff Notes of Du Bois's The Souls of Black Folk, then, that's nowhere, man. I mean, the guy is a really important thinker in American history, and you should have the respect to read him carefully. John Locke was a great, great thinker and incredibly important. And although his English prose is 17th century prose, so it can be difficult to read, you've got to make the effort because, these things deserve respect. I mean, it's like going to an art museum and you see these paintings on the wall, and one of them or the other of them, you might not be your cup of tea, but you have to treat them with a certain amount of respect and reverence. I would say the same is true of classic texts. There are flaws in all of them, but we need these texts. We need Wollstonecraft's Vindication of the Rights of Women. We need the Rousseau's The Social Contract. These are the classics that inspire us and that they do enlighten us as to what the issues are and what the problems are. I mean, I feel like personally I have a great debt to these texts. I wouldn't be anywhere. I mean, I'm not like I'm great or anything, but I would be nowhere without reading this stuff. And stuff that I've read as an adult, like Simmons and Du Bois and Wollstonecraft, has, I think, helped me tremendously to get out of my narrow hangups. And reading Aristotle was a great experience when I was your age. I didn't agree with him then. On most things, especially but I recognized his importance and his greatness. And I think that that's an experience that everyone should have. So there's the course. I mean, as far as I can sort of say beforehand what it is. Again, if you would like to have more clarification or you have questions on anything I've said or anything having to do with the syllabus for this course, please let me know. And again, please contact me directly through my email, d2e@temple.edu, or call me on my cell phone.